Yeah, so welcome everyone. My name is Lara. I'm an Android developer based in Berlin. I work at Blinkist, and I do not do Flutter professionally. I do it as a hobby on my free time. And I also was very lucky this year to give a talk with Emily Fortuna from the Flutter team back in January, where we were able to live code an app meant to be as an introduction to Flutter, and where we also use the WebView widget. And at that point, I really wanted to know how it worked, but I could not figure it out. So it was like, yeah, okay, we just use it, it's fine. But it kept bothering me, and I wanted to know how it worked. So that's why I am talking today about WebViews. It's not like the most passionate topic ever, but you know, it's something. Yeah, so for those who don't know, a WebView is basically a browser bundled on your mobile application. So it's using the WebView, so it allows your mobile app to use any web technologies like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, etc. So you can display content. On Android and on iOS, the WebViews are like any other UI component, and like text views or buttons. And the thing is that the WebViews are just like a mini browser inside your app, which is kind of cool. So when do we use them? You will use them if you want to display something that already exists, so you don't have to implement it natively. This can be like showing a third-party website to confirm a payment. Maybe you don't want to implement that, of course, or showing some static content like the FAQ, because we normally don't have an API for that. We just show whatever we have on our website, and which is fine. The thing, though, is that some people use WebViews to bundle the full websites on their applications, and basically they just create an application with a WebView to display the whole website instead of implementing it natively. But we are native developers, so we don't do that. On Flutter, a WebView is a widget. It doesn't come bundled with the Flutter SDK. It's a package. You have to import it. This is created by the Flutter team. So basically, you just have to import this plugin as any other else. And you will find it, of course, in the old pub.darlang.org website, which now is more convenient to say, which is pub.dev. And well, as for now, this widget is still considered to be in developer's preview because it relies on some Flutter mechanism of embedding views, the Android and iOS views, that is still considered developer preview. To set it up, it's pretty straightforward. You basically just have to declare your package on the pubspec YAML as any other dependency. You see that I'm using here the version 0.3.6, and I think it's the latest. Luckily, they didn't release anything during Google I/O, so cool. And well, as any other package, after you you synchronize your packages, you can just use it on Android. On iOS, though, there's another step which you have to do. That's basically, you can see it here. It's just adding a key. It's fine, just because it's developer preview. But yeah, once you add your package, you can already use it. Okay, so how does the WebView widget has been implemented, or how does it look like? It hasn't been re-implemented in Flutter or Dart. They did not create a Dart web kit, but instead what they are doing is to use the native views. On iOS, they are using, so the WebView widget is backed by the WebKit WebView, and on Android it's backed by the WebView. Flutter will be using the one depending on the platform you are running your application on. Then it uses the native view, the Android and iOS view, and it renders it inside Flutter, like a Flutter widget. Okay, that was the interesting part, like how can the Flutter WebView widget render what is being rendered by the native view? So we are going to learn that today. So for this talk, I'm gonna use just a basic example where, for those who didn't see Flutter before, this is just a regular application with, I'm gonna show you later the parts, but basically we only have the action bar on top and on a body below. And here I'm just loading the flutter.dev website. We'll give more details later. Okay, now to the funny part. So now we are going to learn how the rendering works with the native WebView. And so since I'm Android developer, I will be focusing on Android convenience, but on iOS, I won't show you the details, but on iOS it's pretty much the same. It's very similar, it just uses different classes names, but it's basically the same. So again, I have my working example where we have only an application where we have this particular app with a scaffold, which is the skeleton of our app, and two more things. We have an app bar on top, like an action bar on Android, where we have some buttons, and then the body of our application is a full WebView widget. This is, again, as in any other widget, so you could basically use this widget and make it as small as you want. Now I'm just using the whole body just because I don't have anything else. So this is the Flutter Inspector, by the way, what you see on the left, and this allows you to see what's the widget tray you have. If you click on one of those, you can see more things. If we click on the web view, we will see a bunch of stuff, too much stuff. But the important thing here is the Android view. Now I will show you a diagram step by step, and it's gonna be long and maybe boring for some of you. So later I will give you just a summary, just in case you get lost. No worries, I got lost many times. Also, I will be showing blue and green, and you guess what? Blue for Flutter and green for Android. So we have the WebView widget from the Flutter package, yeah? And this contains as a child an Android view, as we saw in the Flutter Inspector. Okay. Now, what is this Android view doing? This is basically embedding an Android view, as the name says, in the widget hierarchy. This only works from API 20, meaning lollipop, if that is important for you, and also from the documentation, basically. And also they say that this operation of using these Android views is very expensive, and you will learn why now. So when we start the app, on App Start, the framework will register a WebView Flutter plugin on the Android side, and we'll give it some ID. So when you need to create a native web view on Android, this plugin will create it for you the moment you need it. In our case, the Android view that is contained in the Flutter side and the web view from Flutter uses the same ID to tell the framework, hey, I need you to create this view for me, this native view. In this case, it will tell the WebView factory we need to create whatever you are creating. So then the engine will be from Flutter. We'll use this WebView factory to create the actual native view, WebView. And it will create an instance of this Flutter WebView, which is implementing the platform view interface. So as you can see, now Android has created the native WebView, but now we need to use it. We need to render it. So on the native side on Android, there's this platform view controller that will take care of rendering this native WebView. But instead of displaying it on a screen, it's gonna render it in a graphic surface. And then we will use that surface to draw it later on Flutter. Let's see how. On the Flutter side, this Android view contains an internal class called Android Platform View that is gonna use this render Android view, which of course will render. And this is not a widget, this is extending from RenderBox, which in short is basically drawing objects into dimensional space. And as you can see, we have a pattern here. We have our WebView being rendered in a surface. We now have something where we can render in Flutter side. So basically, the render view, in this case, is gonna draw whatever is in the surface, those contents in its view, in the render Android view, and then display it on the screen, basically. And how does it do that? It's using just an ID to identify which surface has to copy. So for each moment you need to copy, you will need, so for, how to say, when you have a website, it's gonna be changing all the time. So you will be copying and copying. So it's a very expensive operation. So I want to say that TLDL, too long didn't listen. Basically, this is just creating, when you use the WebView widget, it's basically creating the native view on Android. Then it will render it on the surface and will copy, paste on the Flutter side and display it. And that's basically how also Google Maps works, for example. And you could use this Android view to render any kind of Android native view if you want, but not recommended, of course. So really cool, but what about iOS? Very similar to Android, but instead of using the render Android view, it's using another class called render UIKit view that will then render in the surface created by the platform view iOS, yes, and by the Flutter engine, and we use also an ID to know what to copy. Okay, really cool, but how do we use it? So the WebView widget contains a series of parameters that you can use, which are worth checking. Those are the ones you can use right now, and I will go through them so you can learn a little bit more about them. First, the initial URL. Let's say we have our widget. This initial URL, it's basically doing what you're thinking. Basically, you pass a string, a website, and it's gonna load that screen, that website once the Flutter WebView is created. This parameter is optional though, so you can provide it later too. If you run this, you have your application and you only have the initial URL. In this case, it would work, but it can be that you use a website that doesn't work and you don't see anything. And the problem is that probably that website requires JavaScript to run. So you need to enable JavaScript. And you do that by using the JavaScript mode, where basically you only have two options. either JavaScript mode unrestricted, so you allow JavaScript to run, or disable, so you won't run it. And by default, it's disabled. That means that if the website you're loading initially requires JavaScript and you don't define that JavaScript mode is unrestricted, it won't work. Another parameter that this widget gives you is the onWebViewCreated, which probably you can guess what it's doing. So I'm adding here the onWebViewCreated. So yeah, exactly. So on WebViewCreated, it's expecting a callback, WebViewCreated callback. It's gonna be invoked once the WebView is created. And then in this callback, you're gonna get this WebViewController. The name already suggests you what you can do with it. You can control the WebView. Basically, what you can do is to keep a reference to this controller, to use it and do some crazy stuff. And what can you do with this controller? So for now, what you can do with this controller are this set of calls, basically. It exposes this bunch of methods, like can go back. And so how do you use them? In this case, those are all asynchronous, meaning that you have to do an async wait call. So for example, back on our example, I'm gonna show you the reload, very straightforward. I have on my map bar this refresh icon button because I want to refresh my website if something is wrong, for example. So how can we invoke this reload action from the controller? So basically, what you can do is on press from your icon button widget, you do an async call and call this controller reload method. Straightforward, that's it. And the same you can do with different things like going back. For example, I didn't do it here, but you can check if first you can go back, like on the stack of websites you have open. It's the first one, so if you cannot go back, just maybe disable the icon. Things like this. Another parameter that this widget has is called onPageFinished, which is another callback. And as the name suggests, it's gonna be invoked with a URL. So it will receive the URL that just loaded once this website finished loading. And what you can do with this, you could, for example, change the UI. Once you receive this URL, say, hey, I finished loading this page. So you can use that to hide, for example, the progress bar to the user. What if you have your WebView widget inside another widget that also captures gestures like a list? You have a list view and you have the WebViews as the item somehow. And you want to scroll the list view. But if you touch one of the WebViews, you're gonna scroll the website, right? You can solve this with the gesture recognizers parameter. For this one, I don't have an example because there's a really cool explanation and also code snippets on this article in Medium from Emily Fortuna. I think it's just worth it reading that one. The cool thing though is that they are using the gesture recognizers so basically they have an application where they are showing different articles from the news and they have web views inside those items. And they use the gesture recognizers for that. And they have, of course, this is recorded on the Flutter Boring Show if you know it. If not, you will find the link inside the article. Imagine that you have your web view and the user clicks on something like Twitter, and I'm on the flutter.dev, and the user clicks on Twitter. I don't want the user to go to Twitter and use my application to just navigate and use my mini browser. I want the users be contained and do whatever they need to do in my application. If they need a browser, they can use a browser. So we can block the navigation whenever we want. To do that, we use the navigation delegate. This navigation delegate is another callback that will receive this navigation request. This navigation request, you can use this to make a navigation decision. So basically say, I want to navigate or not. And so this navigation request is going to be a string, a URL. So from the website that is going to be loaded. You can use this URL to match it against a pattern, against, for example, your own host, to check if it's your own. That's what I'm gonna do later. So if it's not your host, you can block it. And so this navigation delegate will return in the end a navigation decision, which only has two possible values, either prevent to block the navigation or navigate to allow it. And so I'm gonna add this navigation delegate where you can see that the request is gonna be contain the URL that's gonna be loaded. So basically I can do something like this. Just check the URL, check if it starts with my host, so I know if it's my host or not. Either allow the navigation if it's my host or block it. Straightforward. Yeah, the last feature I'm gonna talk about from the widget, WebView widget, is gonna be the JavaScriptChannels, which is really cool. This basically allows JavaScript to communicate with Flutter. As you can see, we have our channels. We can have our channels. We can have more than one. In this case, I'm just having one for the sake of the example. Basically, I just define it in my project as a variable. I have a channel. Bear with me. It's gonna be easy to understand. And this is basically how you define a channel, the communication from JavaScript to Flutter. You have a name, two properties, a name, in this case Lara Demo, and then the message I'm gonna receive, the JavaScript message. With that message, you can do whatever you want. In this case, I'm just printing. I only wanted to see if it was working. How does it work? This is the Flutter site. Yeah, this is what we coded on our application on Flutter. Now, on JavaScript side, basically you just have to call this Lara Demo, invoke the method post message, and send a string. For now, you can only send a string. That's it. Once you open the website that contains this script, and this script is run, basically this message is gonna be received by the Flutter side. So it's gonna print that message. So yeah, in general, we've seen that we can do many things with the WebView, from basic navigation to interaction between JavaScript and Flutter. But this is an early stage plugin, so it means that it's not feature complete, and there are some problems, or not problems, but things that do not work yet. So let's take a look to the biggest among current limitations. Input fields. So there's an issue on Android when bringing up the keyboard when you select a input field. So that means that you cannot use input fields at all on your web view, because basically the user cannot type. You cannot use your website web view to do for example, a social login or a payment, because the user cannot type, because there's a problem with the keyboard. This is a huge blocker for many people. Yeah. Cool thing, you cannot see it, but it's added as a milestone for October 2019. I don't know if it's soon enough, but yeah. But it's gonna be there soon. Text selection is right now blocked. There's an issue not with text selection, but when you select text on Android, you get some handles on top like cut, copy, blah, blah. And those handles are not showing for some reason. There's some, I don't know. So what they did is just to override the long press. So whenever you long press on the web view, it doesn't work. Also, milestone near-term goals, I don't know what it means. I hope it's soon, but yeah. And performance, that's the question many people ask about web views and stuff. So you've seen that rendering the Android view is very costly. So yeah, when you open the Android view, you have a huge documentation. It says, don't use it if you don't need it. So, you know, yeah, it's very costly because it's basically copying. Flutter is copying whatever the native view is rendering and rendering itself. So yeah, be mindful about using web views or any other native views inside Flutter. Not everything is bad news. The Flutter team and the community is working hard on improving this plugin and make it ready and feature complete. There are things on the pipeline that you can see everything on GitHub. So good things that I've seen is, for example, on the pipelines, the ability of loading an HTML string. So for example, imagine you have a document on HTML locally on your app, and you want to load this without having to load a URL. So let's say you have the FAQ on locally. This would be very useful. Yeah. So it's on the pipeline. I think it's created by someone from the community, but I'm not sure. Setting a custom user agent is also a very common use case when you are implementing a WebView-based application, because this user agent will help the website to know that you are accessing it from your application instead of other clients. So that's because the user agent normally includes also the version of the app and more information. And yeah, this feature is also on the pipeline soon-ish. And finally, I think it's also very nice is that you kind of need to know if your web was loaded correctly, that the page was loaded correctly, not that just finished, but you want to know that there were no errors. So I think, yeah, I hope they have this ready sooner, so you are able to know that if the your WebView, the website was not able to load properly. And yes, as you can see, this pull request provides lots of callbacks for this kind of events. As you know, as you've seen, everything is on GitHub because Flutter is open source. So and so is the WebView plugin, meaning that you can contribute to. When I was preparing this talk and working playing around with the JavaScriptChannels, I was able to do a really tiny small fix on the documentation, which I'm proud of, you know. But if that means if I could do that, you can do so too. Flutter is open source, so anything you can think of needs you can always submit a pull request. Or also go there and thumbs up things that you need, so they know and they rush. Yeah, so as I said before, you can find the slides already on Twitter, if I'm not mistaken, if it worked. Thank you a lot, Flutter Berlin, for having me, and thank you all for listening and not sleeping. Thank you.